Module 6, dot plots. Dot plots can also be called line plots, like we can see in our picture of our graph here. So a dot plot and a line plot are the exact same thing, and they show a set of data. So for example, we can see that 4 people scored 88%. So that means one of these little X's represents one person. All right, now let's answer some questions using our dot plot. So how many students received a score of 94%? 2. What was the highest score in the class? The highest score was 98% because that is where our data stops. We can see that there's no X's above 99% and there's no X's above 100%. So the highest score was 98%. What was the lowest score in the class? The lowest score was 88%. And we can see that that is the first number that our dot plot starts with. And it also, the first number on our dot plot that has any X's above it. So how many students received a score in the 80s? So to answer this question, you have to add together the amount of people that scored an 88% and the amount of people that scored 89%, and that is 10. So 10 students scored in the 80s. So how many students received a score in the 90s? So this time we're going to take all our scores that came between 90 and 98, and we're going to add those all up for an answer of 17. How many students scored 93% or less? So you're going to start with 93, and you're going to go to the 88% and add those up for an answer of 16. And how many students are in Mr. Bradley's science class? To answer this question, you are simply just going to add up all the X's together for an answer of 27 students. All right, example number 2. So we have a set of data that are quiz scores that a music teacher gave out. We are going to use this data to help us create a dot plot. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a title. So we're going to call this dot plot Scores on Music Composer Test. When you're giving a graph a title, it should tell us what the graph is going to be about. So this tells us that it is going to be about scores that students received on a music composer test. And then we have to label our axis. So what do the numbers represent? So in this graph, our numbers are going to represent the test scores. And now we can number our number line. And so we're going to go back, we're going to look at our data, and we're going to see what our smallest number is. And we can see that our smallest number is 0, so our graph should start with 0. And then we're going to see what our biggest number is. And our biggest number is 6, so our graph should end with 6. And then we can simply fill in the rest of the numbers. So now we're going to make our little X's or our little dots for our dot plot. So we're going to start with 0. And we're going to see how many students scored 0 on the test. And 1 student scored 0, so we're going to put 1 X above 0. And then we're going to do that same process for 1. So how many students scored a 1 on their quiz? And 1 person also scored 1 on the quiz, so there's 1 X above that. And we're going to do that same process for 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I have gone ahead and I have finished our dot plot, and we have 3 students who scored 3, 2 students who scored 4, 3 students who scored 5, and 6 students who scored 6. And then there were no students who scored 2. And now that we have our dot plot made, we can answer some questions. So how many students scored exactly 3 on their quiz? Three students scored exactly 3 on their quiz. And how many students scored higher than 3? So when we're answering this question of how many students scored higher than 3, we're not including 3. So that's going to be 4, 5, and 6. So how many students scored 4, 5, and 6? And we're going to add those numbers all up, and we're going to get 11. And how many students scored less than 3? So again, to answer this question, we're not including 3. We're only including 0 and 1. And we're going to add those up, and we're going to get an answer of 2. And what score did the highest number of students receive? And the highest score that our students received was a 6, because that is the number that has the most X's above it. All right, in our last example, Mr. Gosling has 19 jars with liquids in them. The jars are shown in the box below. So in order to help us with this question, because if you look at our number line that's already been created for us, we see fractions. And so I'm going to draw Mr. Gallon Man over here on the side, and he's going to help us figure out where all of these jars go. So I have drawn Mr. Gallon Man over on the right side of the screen, and at the bottom of Mr. Gallon Man, I've just written that 2 cups equals 1 pint because I don't really have enough room in the P's to draw the 2 little C's. So now that we have this drawn, we can start making our dot plot. So we're going to just start with an easy one. This goes from 0 to 1. So what would be 1 whole? So 1 whole in this problem is going to be a gallon. So how many gallons do we have? We have 5 gallons, and I have drawn 5 X's above our 1. And now let's go to another easy one for a half. What would a half be looking at these jars? So a half would be half gallon, and we can see that there are half gallons in our jars. So how many half gallons are there? There are 3 half gallons, and I have drawn the X's above 1 half. Now, we have 2 left. We have a quart and we have a pint. So what would represent a pint? Let's start with that one. What would represent a pint? What number on this number line would represent a pint? One-eighth is going to represent a pint here, because if we go to Mr. Gallon Man, we can see that there are 8 little P's in Mr. Gallon Man. So 1 pint is going to be 1/8 of a gallon. So how many pints are there? There are 7 pints, and I have drawn 7 X's above 1/8. And now all that's left is a quart. So what number on our number line is going to represent a quart? 1/4 is going to represent a quart, because if you look at Mr. Gallon Man, we can see that there are 4 quarts. So 1/4 is going to be for quart, because if you have 1 quart, that is 1/4 of a gallon. So how many quarts do we have? We have 4 quarts, and I have drawn 4 X's above 1/4. And now that we have our dot plot made, we can answer some questions, and I'm going to erase Mr. Gallon Man so I can write the answers on the right side of your screen. So our first question is, how many jars have a 1 gallon capacity? So we have 5 jars that have a 1 gallon capacity. And how many jars have a capacity of less than 1 quart? So in order to solve that question, we aren't looking at 1/4, we're not looking at the quarts, we're only going to be looking at the pints, because that is less than 1/4. So how many pints did we have? And pints were 1/8. And we have 7. So there are 7 jars that are less than 1 quart. And how many jars have a capacity of 1 quart or more? So in order to answer this question, it says 1 quart or more. So we're going to add up all the numbers between 1/4 and 1. And we have 12 jars that have a capacity of 1 quart or more. And that's it. Now you know how to make dot plots and how to read dot plots.